At times you're going to be given information in the format of a two-way table, and it's pretty good. I mean, if I said, hey, look, we asked 300 people the following question: which do you like better, steak or pasta? And keep in mind these numbers are completely made up. Um, we would read this two-way table in this format. 74 males said they like steak better. 26 males said they like pasta better. This column right here says that we surveyed a total of 100 males. Down here we could say 76 females said they like steak better, and here was 124 females that said they like pasta better, and we interviewed a total of 200 females. And then we have another total row down here. We add these two numbers up and it becomes 150. 26 plus 124 is 150, and 100 plus 200 is 300. So that's how a two-way table works, and it's pretty helpful. You can get a lot of information from it. But if I said, could you make a two-way relative frequency table? A relative frequency table. That's referring to, can we turn it into percents for the most part? But instead of using percents, we'll use decimals, because you can look at a decimal and quickly decide what it would be as a percent, and we'll show you about that. And then we also take a look at a two-way relative frequency table for the rows. That's a variation of it, and then there's another variation of a two-way relative frequency table for the columns. So let's go on to answer the very first one. Make a two-way relative frequency table. This table is being given to you, okay? So we're going to give you the original two-way table, and we want you to actually go through and make another table that's a two-way relative frequency table. And when this happens, I need you to find how many people you were talking to total. In this case, it was 300. And the way that we will fill in all of these 9 squares for this two-way relative frequency table is we take the values that are given and we simply divide it by whatever number this is. So 74 divided by 300, 26 divided by 300, 100 divided by 300, 76 divided by 300. Every single one of these numbers is going to be divided. Even this number right here will be divided by itself. And that's pretty easy. You pull out your calculator, and if you run into a interesting situation, let's get the calculator on here and we'll clear it back to the home screen. 74 divided by 300, 74 divided by 300 equals 0.246 repeating. And generally what I tell my students is never round it unless they tell you, and here I'm going to tell you, let's always round to the second decimal place, the hundredths place. So that 6 right here rounds that 4 up to a 5, so we just put 0.25. And what this means is, out of all the people that they surveyed, 25% were male that chose steak. Okay, that's what it's talking about. And then we just go through and we fill up the chart. 26 divided by 300 would be the next one. And you get 0.086 repeating. So again, we're just going to round it up to 0.09. 100 divided by 300 is 0.3 repeating, so that rounds to 0.33. And I'm just going to pause the video and fill in the rest of the table for you. Now, this is interesting to look at. 25 plus 9, or this is 25% and this would be 9%, that would normally add up to 34%, but because we're rounding through all of this, that's the reason it's off by 1. So if when you're trying to add horizontally or vertically, you may very well find that your percentages are off slightly, and that's because you rounded. If you don't round, it'll be a lot more accurate. This would be 0.5, which means you can always slide a 0 on there to remind yourself it's 0.50. This is 0.50, and 300 divided by 300 is 1. This would be referred to as 100%. So I can tell you that 50% of all people that were surveyed for this, steak or pasta question, 50% chose pasta, 50% chose steak. 25% of all people surveyed that chose steak were female. And the reason that we have to read the stats that way is every single number has been divided by the total number of people. So every single percentage we say out of all the people that were surveyed, 41% were females that like pasta. And then the other 9% of the people that like pasta were males. Together, it's 50% of the people chose pasta. How do we know that? Well, 150 people out of 300 chose pasta. So that makes sense. This is talking about actual people count. This is talking about percentage, and we write it as a decimal. Number 2 is actually a little bit easier. Again, this was your given table here. This was given. So this is not new information. But when it says make a relative frequency table for the rows, that's the only thing that's different on the question. We handle it a little bit differently. Basically, the rows run horizontal, and we take a look at the total for each row, and we divide it. So this 74 is going to be divided by 100. This 26 is going to be divided by its rows total, which is 100. And the 100 itself is still going to be divided by itself, 100. This row of female is the total of 200, so we're going to divide this by 200, divide this by 200, and divide this one by 200. And then hopefully you see the pattern. We would divide the third row by its row total, which is 300. And I'll pull up my calculator to show us the first one. There we go. So let's do 74 divided by 100. 74 divided by 100 would equal 0.74. So that's exactly what I put right here, 0.74. Let's do the 76 divided by 200 because I think that one will show up a little bit different. 76 divided by 200. It's 0.38. Now that's disappointing. I was hoping to show a situation where we're going to have to round again. I'll tell you what, let's try the 124 divided by 200. That's 0.62. So, sometimes it's nice you don't have to go through and round it all. Let me go ahead and fill in the rest of the table for us. There we go. Now, when we're talking about for the rows, then the percentages are referred to within the roll. So 74% of the males preferred steak and 26% of the males preferred pasta. We don't get information mixed up with any other rows. So here 38% of the females like steak and 62% of the female preferred pasta. And again, this just stands for 100%. And down here, if we said of all the people, because this is total, this is meaning female and male together, right? Because 150 was 74 and 76 added together. This is of everybody, basically half preferred steak, half preferred pasta, and this is your total right there of 100%. Again, these numbers are completely made up. In my class, really majority, regardless of gender, prefers steak. Pasta is not nearly as popular. Let's go on to number 3. This is the last one. It's almost the exact same thing, but they're asking for a relative frequency two-way table made for the columns. And what we do is, again, this is a given table. This is what I was given to you at the very beginning. You look at the columns. These are the vertical columns. So this is your total for this column. That means I'm going to take 74 and divide it by 150. 76 will be divided by 150, and this will be divided by 150. Then at the same time, I will take this total for this pasta column, and everything's divided by whatever is in this total position. So this divides by 150, divide by 150, and divide by 150. And then the last column, again, we just use its own total for the division. And it gets us some pretty nice data here as well. So let's go through and just do a little bit of the work here. Let's see, 74 divided by 150. It's just 0.493. So basically this is going to round to 0.49. And I'll go fill in the rest of the table because you can see here what I'm going to be typing into the calculator. There we go. Our table's completed, and that's all that they ask. But let's take a look at the information that it gives us. Of the people that like steak, 49% were male and 51% were female. Okay, and that's, again, That's of the people that like steak. We're not letting the columns crisscross. We took the total number of people that liked each category and did the dividing. So we're saying out of all the people that like steak and only chose steak, 49% of that group were male and 51% were female. And it makes sense because you had two more females that like steak than males. Now over here on pasta, you had a lot more female that were liking pasta according to the survey, but you did have 26 men there. If you take 26 and divide it by 150, you got 0.17, and we had a round. That means that 17% of the people that like pasta were males, and 83% of the people that chose pasta were females. So, and again, 17.17 and 0.83 equals 1. So, this is your total here. And if you wanted to ask yourself the following question, well, how many men were actually in the survey? Well, 33% of the men were in the survey, and 67% of the females were in the survey of that total of 300 people. So this kind of gives you a percentage of how much each gender was in play for this question. Hopefully this helps you understand the basics. Again, when you're asked to make a two-way relative frequency table, you're going to be looking at this bottom right corner, and everything's divided by that number. If it was 279, every single one of these would have 279 written into it to do the division. Make sure you round if needed. Be careful though, sometimes they don't want you to round to two places. They might ask you to round differently. If they say make a relative frequency table for the rows, use each row total to divide each row. So this 100 divided this entire first row for the male information. The 200 here was the total for the row of females, for everything's divided by 200, so on and so forth. And then the columns, instead of using the row totals, what we would be doing is we would just literally go through and divide each column by 150. Well, for the steak and pasta column, you take their column totals, do the division, and then the total column here is 300 total, so we would divide all of that by 300.